forwards and backwards. And so I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to get to the questions so they can give you this insight. But let me go ahead and introduce our panel. Immediately to my left here, we have David North. He's the CEO of Squire Dental. Right next to David is the beautiful Rondi Michelle. Rondi is the president and chief growth. Yes, Rondi, there we go. She is the president and chief growth officer of Aspire Dental. To her left, we have John Geary, equally beautiful, obviously. He is the chief operating officer of Independence Dental Services. And then to his left is we have David Gaspar. David is the CEO of Small Partners. So join me in welcoming them to the stage. All right. So, John, I'm going to throw this first question out to you. As I kind of alluded to in my opening remarks, the market has been a little bit different. 2019, you started experiencing rapid consolidation in the industry. It seems like there were deals being had left and right. Last couple of years, maybe it's been a little bit flatter, at least from my perspective as someone who works in mergers and acquisitions. So I'm just curious, John, from your perspective, what are you seeing in the market today, and kind of maybe where do you see the market going?
Yeah, it's certainly not as fast as it was back in that 1920 time frame. Obviously, the cost of capital went up. That made buyers a little bit more cautious about where they wanted to invest their capital. We do still see really healthy competitions for what I would call really good assets and really good markets. So groups that have a really healthy growth profile, groups that have a healthy company culture, they have a growth plan in mind, right? It was easy enough to consolidate everything and demand no growth when capital was free. Now that you need to return a good rate of return for your investors, right? You have to have a runway for growth. And then in terms of markets, right, you want to be in a place where there's good net migration. If you're in a market where there's a pretty dense population of available associates, so recruiting becomes very easy. If you're in a market that has a friendly regulatory environment where DSOs can operate, there's still very healthy competition that can deliver some good value for sellers. But leverage is still tight, and it's deal structures are going to be a little bit different. There's going to be a little more discussion about that, I think, later in the panel. But the opportunities still exist if you've got a well-run organization. You understand what your goals are and how you plan to achieve those goals by affiliating with the right partner.
It's a great answer. So what I'm hearing from that too is that it's more challenging, but there are still deals to be had out in the market. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Okay, so David, kicking this over to you and kind of what you're seeing out there, while obviously there are deals still being had, like, what I keep seeing in my practice is that there are hurdles though to kind of getting back to where we were in 2019, 2020, 2021.
Yep.
What hurdles are you seeing out there, and how do you guys actively seek to kind of overcome some of those hurdles, or maybe how can people in our audience think about overcoming some of those hurdles as they prepare themselves for potential affiliation?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is understanding the business, understanding what the opportunities are to continue to grow, not only in the short term, in 1 year or 2 years, but really longer down the road of what is that growth strategy for 5 or 10 years. And then, the big thing is obviously valuations. And I think over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of education and a lot more alignment on what is value and what drives value and what builds value. And so it enhances the productivity of the conversations. Whereas in the past, some of those hurdles were just getting started and understanding how do you get on the same page, having those productive conversations. And then really, looking at the provider piece of it. That's one of those hurdles of, if you have a great provider group today, what does that look like in the future? Whether it's doctors, hygienists, as well as the non-clinical team, but really what is that plan around how you're going to support, how you're going to develop the providers to make sure that you have them in place for the long term, so that not only do you have success initially, but then you have success down the road.
In my experience, working with a lot of buyers and sellers, we have a unique space kind of being on both sides of the market at times and kind of seeing it from both perspectives. It seems like back in the early days, most of this kind of boiled down to pricing and economic mechanisms when trying to consider what made the most sense for affiliation, and that's obviously changed a lot in the last few years. And from what one of the things that we all talked about as we prepared for this was that companies need to have investment strategies. DSOs have to have an investment strategy, a thesis for what they're looking for out there, and then they have to execute on that strategy. So David, at Squire, when you guys think about affiliation, what is y'all's thesis? What is your investment strategy when you're looking at assets for affiliation, and then how do you execute on that?
Yeah, I think the primary beginning of that is understanding what makes them unique, right? It's a different view than we typically look at the balance sheet. Our approach is how are they going to fit within our culture, and really understanding that we want practices that are very connected to their community and driving the value around that patient experience. So the investment tends to be pretty simple. One of the great things is we're not seeing DSOs drive up the value into numbers that shouldn't be. So we're in a pretty steady valuation structure. But our path has been really developing a long-term partnership with that doctor. So it's crucial that they want to stay, but they're not looking for an exit. I think one of the primary tenets is I want them to be here 5, 6, 7 years past that deal and driving growth with us and really investing back into the partnership. That's a crucial element for us that's unique again inside the market. So, yeah.
So that's interesting. One of the things that we see out there when we talk about investing in the partnership, one of the ways that happens is in a lot of these transactions, people who are affiliating will have equity, with the buyer when they roll over. But we're also seeing in the market different types of strategies, maybe changes in structures, the way that deals are being structured to account for some of these maybe financial gaps that we're seeing out there in the market. I'm going to send this over to you, Ronnie. I can't believe I waited till the end of my first round of questions. I mean, she got the biggest applause, and that was dumb. But anyway, Ronnie, what are from your standpoint, being at Aspire, working with a lot of potential affiliations, when you're thinking about structuring a transaction and you're talking to affiliates, what types of models and mechanisms are you seeing out there in the deals that you're doing right now that you may not have done back 5 years ago?
I think there's a lot of creative structures now. We're seeing a lot of JV structure, we're seeing earnouts, we're seeing selective equity. We're also seeing in the offers, like just different ways to align not just the DSO, but what the seller's expectations are to keep alignment on both sides of the party. I think that really, on a JV structure, then that'll leave the doctor to have a lot of skin in the game. So you don't just mitigate risk, but you also allow room for growth in the future. I don't think that there's one right or wrong model, whether you're seeing an offer that's a JV, just holdco, a hybrid. I think, in the end, you have to figure out what works for you as a seller and what you're looking to achieve and have those conversations. But I don't think a lot of us aren't tied to one deal structure today.
And are you seeing more joint venture models out in the industry today? Is that
yes, and not just more joint venture structures, but flexibility. Like you used to see a lot of an 80-20 structure. Now you're seeing a lot of a 60-40 structure, or you're seeing less in holdco, a little bit more in the individual practice.
Okay, so when we say 80-20, 60-40, for those out there that don't know, we're just talking about that ratio of cash to equity. And when we talk about equity in a holdco structure versus like a joint venture structure, when you set up an organization, the top of the organization may have a holdco above it, and it was very traditional back in 2019 or 20 for a lot of folks to have equity at that level. But more and more we see folks that are having joint venture models, which is kind of a subsidiary model where they have equity at that level. And from an operational standpoint, it also allows some of the practitioners to participate in distributions, perhaps on an ongoing basis. And I know from my practice, we see that fairly often too. We get more phone calls about joint venture models and more questions about that.
It's also a great way to align your interests if you're still growing your business, because you're still sharing in the profits of the practice, and you're aligned because you're growing together, which for a lot of younger, mid-aged dentists, like that's something that's very attractive because you're not at the end of your career and you're still looking for something to keep balance, and it gives that tangible piece of still having autonomy in your practice.
Right.
Yeah.
And David, you had some interesting thoughts around some of the models, like the joint venture models, and maybe why those are coming about with regards to recaps and other things. things? Like,
Yeah.
what are you seeing?
I think the predominant reason is because the recaps haven't happened, right? A prospective owner seller today is not as intrigued by that model, right? The idea of getting that the second bite at the apple isn't as tangible as it has been in the past. So rather have the JV model and receive those distributions now and participate early rather than later.
And speaking of that, so when we talk about the recap, a recap where an outside investor comes in and, takes an equity position in the company, and people who hold equity may be able to liquidate some of that, it's no secret that there haven't been as many success stories in the last 18 months in the recap market, and that's probably created a little bit of, perhaps a negative momentum or perspective on the DSO market. I mean, John, David, I'll throw this to you guys. I mean, is the recap market, is it dead for now? Or is that something that is just in a holding pattern and we just have to see some things change in the market before we get back to that?
Yeah, good question. I don't think that it's dead. I don't think that you're going to see some of the really big headline numbers for platforms that you saw back in that kind of frothy 2019, 2020, 21 timeframe. I think that there are going to be a handful of deals in the 11 to sometimes 12 range. But I don't think that the capital markets are super excited about dentistry just yet. I think that they will be. I think there's still tremendous opportunity. I think as an industry, I think it's a safe place to bet and a safe place to invest capital. But again, I think right now, with the cost of capital being high, I just don't think that we're going to see those really, really big platform multiples, but there will be deals that take place, and that will give us a little bit of momentum and benchmark for others to start thinking about, okay, what is the opportunity if I'm able to find assets, if I'm able to help those assets grow, lever down my entry multiple, I can still create a very healthy arbitrage, even at that kind of 11 to 12 frame.
No, I don't think they're dead. We were lucky enough to recapitalize earlier this year, so I guess I'm proof that it's not dead. And get the additional capital, continue to grow, and look into the future. I do think that the key is, can you grow? Do you have strong operational knowledge in the business to make sure that growth is repeatable? Because nobody's going to want to buy a business and stay stagnant. That just doesn't exist. So what is that growth model? What does the operations look like? And then what is the plan with the providers? Because same thing, if you buy a business and the providers change and there's not the alignment that Ronnie was talking about, there's not that connection, and you have that turnover, that's going to make the growth really challenging. And so, the organizations that are able to prove and show the consistent growth, they've got great operations, they've got great relationships with their providers, the providers are engaged and excited and want to be there, I think those organizations are going to be attractive to buyers, and then there's going to be more and more momentum. And I think from my perspective over the last couple of years, I'm going to call it the professionalization of DSOs, is that we're getting better of having that growth strategy, executing on that growth strategy, adjusting when it's not working and getting better, and people are taking notice of that, and they're wanting to, again, invest more and more money into those platforms that are doing that.
And and one of the things, we've talked a little bit about the market here, and just about the kind of the financial aspect of these transactions, but all DSOs are different, and they all have different cultures, they all have different kind of viewpoints on what how they're going to grow their corporate structure. And so beyond, when you're thinking about, if you're talking to the audience here and you have folks who are considering affiliations with DSOs, there's got to be more than just what the bottom line number is, right? There's got to be more to a transaction than that. And so, Rondi, you and John actually had some good thoughts about this when we were preparing for this. I'll start with you, Rondi. I mean, what would you tell people in the audience? What other things beyond just the bottom line number should they be thinking about when they're viewing an organization?
Interview the people that you're looking to partner with, spend time together, ask for some visibility into the team. I wouldn't make a rash decision and it's not just top line for us, it shouldn't just be the highest offer for you. So do your homework, learn what's really important to you, see if that aligns with the organization that you're talking to, really spend time with the people. A lot of times you can get blocked in those conversations by an advisor, but you're in control of that situation. So set the tone for the conversations you want to have. We're all prepared for tough conversations. It's okay. We can have those. And just try to get as much transparency as you can, because at the end of the day, however long you've spent growing your baby, we're married at the end of the day when we do a partnership, and the rest of your career is going to be spent with whomever you decide to partner with. So that's a really big decision. And I would spend quality time together making sure that your goals are aligned.
Yeah, I think Ronnie touched on a good point, right? If it's a 100% buyout transaction, by all means, the headline number matters. If you're getting into a JV or a holdco equity situation, or if you've got an earnout, right, or a hybrid of those three, ultimately you've got to look beyond that headline number and make sure that you are joining an organization that aligns with your values. You use the word marriage, and I think most of the DSO contracts probably last as long as the average marriage in the United States these days. But if you're going to be married to someone, you want to make sure that they share your values, that you have alignment on your goals, and that they have the resources to support those goals. Your work towards those goals. Ultimately, you need to understand certain things like, what are the timing of the cash flows from the transaction? What are the tax consequences of those cash flows? But really, for our organization, it's about making sure that we have partners that, one, understand their value, want to work with us to achieve their goals, so that collectively, right, we're able to. We're a JV and a holdco model, right? So we have them invested in their own practice, but also invested in the platform and wanting to share best practices with other partners to make sure that they're supporting not only their own practice growth, but they're supporting the growth of the entire network. So understand who you're marrying. Make sure that your values are aligned. Make sure that you understand, if it is a holdco model, right? Is there a plan in place? What does that value model look like over time if you achieve the goals that are in place? And if there is an earnout, make sure that you have a partner that, again, can support you in achieving your goals, either top line or expansion of margin, and make sure that they're capitalized to actually pay those earnouts when the time comes. We've seen some really horror stories from the last couple of years where people have gotten involved with DSOs. There's been a lot of promise and promises unkept. So make sure that you understand the balance sheet of the group that you're getting involved with as well.
Just before we move on, we talked about knowing who you're going to marry. We all know divorce is expensive and painful and time-consuming. It's no different if you decide to part ways.
And to build on what both of them said, I think it's that culture piece. And so, culture is a big word, or can be a big idea, but really understanding what your culture is and what that looks like, as well as your partner's culture. And examples of like diving into that are, patient-centric. Our culture for us is we're very patient-centric. We're trying to increase access. We're trying to do what we can to help more people in the communities that we serve. So is that adding days, adding hours, adding providers? What does that look like? Is there alignment around that culture? Retaining patients, retaining team members, investing in those team members. Is that aligned in that culture? And then ultimately, are both sides willing to spend money, time, and effort to make sure that those things happen? And so asking those questions, being authentic, and really diving in and understanding the day-to-day mechanics of what that big picture culture means, that's a really important thing, I think.
That's great. That actually kind of builds on, Ronnie, you had said something at the very beginning of your answer where you said interview. And so, the expectation here is, I'm sure it's probably nerve-wracking for folks, they own a practice, they're going to meet with this big giant organization and have a lot of questions thrown at them about how their practice runs. But it seems like it's fair to say that it's equally appropriate for them to be asking questions of you guys. And beyond some of the things that David just said, what other questions, David, Ronnie, would you expect, someone coming in to ask of your organizations?
Well, I'll piggyback on the culture idea, right? Is really understanding what our goals are. We all want growth, but how are we going to accomplish that? So they need to understand what our expectation of that is and how we go about that. What's our roadmap for it? And is it just driving that top line, or is it patient-centric, right? If one of our first core value is patient first. So every business decision we make is centered around is it best for the patient. So that has to filter through the entire organization. So that's a question that they need to understand. If they're patient-centric, then they need to make sure that the DSO is aligned with it. Without it, we're going to be at odds 90% of the time. Doesn't work.
That's when divorce happens, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Separation.
Yeah, separation. So, well, so we've spoken a little bit about the market, a little bit about, this interview process, and then, kind of to get more granular into how you guys look at practices that you're evaluating. I feel like it's just a more intentional process these days. Diligence may take a little longer, because it sounds like, and from my experience, DSOs are really trying to kind of look further beyond the company to understand, what is its growth potential, where can we add value. So, David, at Squire, when you guys are evaluating practice, what do you look at to evaluate the scalability and growth potential of a dental practice?
And again, it starts with that first view of, what's the commitment level to the patient. So for us, we're getting off of the P&L. That's the easy evaluation. The harder part is, are you connected with the community? Do you have a long-term view of that? And while that's not a metric necessarily, we can look at Google reviews, and we want to see a significant amount of 5-star reviews within that, grouping. But we're also looking at productivity opportunity. So for us, multiple providers, a distribution of the revenue creation within that, group of providers. Hygiene performance within that is a crucial element to know, do we have room? What's our utilization in the schedule? Do we have room for growth? It's easy to talk about growth, but if it's not even available, if the capacity's not there, or we're already nearing peak productivity, we've got to figure a new way. And so we've got to plan that in advance as we're working through it. So I like to get off of the strict P&L views and start looking at those other elements that lead to growth. So lead measures that lead to growth.
And so, add just one thing.
Yeah.
I think that the JV model lends itself to succession planning as well. Right? There's an opportunity for an associate to buy into a percentage of the business, not have to go out and start their own practice and hang their shingle, but have an existing patient base, existing team, a DSO to support them, which can be very attractive. So I would add succession planning as you have a conversation with your partner. Obviously, they're doing this deal because at some point they are thinking about hanging it up, retiring. Do they have a succession plan in place and have somebody identified that they've invested in? Do they talk about their team? Are they excited about how this might impact their team? Are they nervous about how this might impact their team? Are they asking questions? What's going to change inside of my practice for my team members? Are they going to be safe? That investment in your team and your personnel, I think, resonates with DSOs that you're the type of partner that we're going to work with.
We talked a little bit about looking at how you guys look at practices and what practices might be able to do to kind of prepare for that affiliation. One of the pitches I always hear is that it's not just an acquisition game. The DSOs do add value. They come in and they do certain things to help practices to maximize their potential. And I think one of the things that we've seen more recently is that there's been more of a focus today than maybe a few years ago on kind of post-acquisition integration practices. For me, at least, my experience has been there was a lot of acquisition and maybe less time spent on making sure that all the pieces fit, right? And now, more so than ever, we're seeing a focus on that. So, Ronnie, I want to ask you, you mentioned this when the lead up to this, is that talking about post-integration, post-acquisition integration strategies, how does Aspire handle that? How do you look at that? What does your company do as it comes to integrating these practices?
I think we've all learned through time that growth doesn't happen when you close the deal. It's a long-term conversation. It's planning beforehand to know what expectations and goals we both have on both sides of that closing table, and then making sure that we have a plan that's specific, that's customizable. Nothing within Aspire is really cookie cutter. We do have systems and processes for things that, would give a great patient experience, but in the individual practices will leave a lot of autonomy on the table. So I think being able to spend time together creating a growth strategy as to what's important for that individual practice, because even though you could be partnering with a 5-location group, the goals of each of those locations within that 5 practice group could be a little different depending on the makeup of the team, if there's specialty, just longevity of who's on the staff. So it's kind of, you know, you have to have some flexibility.
Do you, I mean, after an affiliation happens, does there tend to be, are there a lot of meetings and other things that happen between you guys and affiliated practices to make sure the onboarding happens smoothly? I mean, how does that, I mean, John, are you familiar with that process?
Yeah, I would say it's really important to have a very strong practice leader that's aligned with the owner doctor, that is aligned on goals, of what they're hoping to accomplish. We've kind of shifted to where we want to make sure that the team in the practice knows that the transaction is about to take place, at least at that practice leader level, so that they understand what's coming. Because ultimately you want somebody that you can work with on those integration efforts, and then post-integration work on those growth plans and allow the dentist to continue to either practice chair side, mentor the associates in the business, make sure that patients are taken care of. So I encourage everybody to have a really strong practice leader that understands your business as well as you do, so that you've got somebody to lean on during that integration period.
So, I mean, sitting here today, we talked, market's been a little bit different. We're all looking for positive momentum, in the coming months and next year. But David, I'll throw this over to you. From your perspective, small partners, what are you guys, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing DSO groups today?
Yeah, so I think, the growth strategy that we're all talking about for the long term, that first year, that second year, there's some levers that can be pulled. You can get that growth, you can get that momentum. But what does year 5, year 10, year 15 look like from an access perspective, a capacity perspective, a provider perspective? And so, planning that out and really understanding what that opportunity is. And then, obviously, society is changing, demographics are changing, the workforce is changing, and so being able to build a culture that can appeal to everybody, right? The attracting and retaining the top talent is going to be a huge differentiator. The DSOs that do that well and can consistently do that, they're the ones that are going to win. And so how do you build that culture that's going to speak to a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds, with a lot of different goals and what they want to accomplish in their lives and in their careers, and how do you make that happen and make it live day in and day out?
That's great. So we got about a minute or so left, so I figured, I'd ask this of each of you to kind of give us your thoughts on this. So we have a lot of people out there that may be interested, in kind of exploring the market a bit. Maybe they're in the process right now. So David, I'll start with you. Just what advice would you give to those in our audience who are exploring these opportunities? How would they prepare for that? Like, what's one nugget they can take away with them as they explore those opportunities?
I think I go back to this interviewing statement that Rodney made earlier. I think you've got to really interview any of your peers who have gone through that transaction, understand where, their positives or negatives, what worked, what didn't work. But really take the time to interview the doctors inside of the organization that you're considering. We give them every number and every doctor name in the list. So I think when you find an opportunity that's that open, dive into it and ask me the question.
Ronnie?
Well, we mentioned the interview process. I don't think that there's a time constraint. I think a lot of times people feel that there's this finish line that you have to get to by a certain time frame to, I have to get this done by the end of the year. Or I think giving yourself a little bit of space to make a decision that you don't rush into for both sides that are looking at doing a partnership. So when you're evaluating, hey, I'm looking to do something with my practice, my group of practices, or the DSO that you're creating, spend time and figure out what's important to you and your team. A lot of times where I see success is if you bring in a knowledge party, whether it's a practice manager, they can sign an NDA, you can have a succession bonus for them being involved in the process. But a lot of times, like when you have another team member involved, they're asking questions that you might forget to ask. And a lot of times when you then go through a closing, your team is like, they spend more time with you than they spend with their families half the time, right? And so then there's this feeling of this can't be a good thing because you hid it from me. So I don't think you have to be afraid when you start exploring options and you're looking to do something in a partnership partnership level. So interview the groups, but also think about letting somebody in on the team know what's going on so that they can help and be part of the process. Because once you get into diligence, it's a heavy lift to try to get a lot of the requests, and it makes things a lot easier.
That's great advice, John.
I'll be very brief since we're over time. Know your value, know your values, and don't compromise on either.
That's great. David?
Know what you do well. Find a partner that can help you double down on what you do well. Really know what your opportunities are. Find a partner that can help you close the gap on your opportunities. And in my opinion, don't be afraid to talk about the opportunities. We're going to find them. Everybody's going to find them. You're going to see them. Have that conversation up front so you can have a plan to solve that so you have success in the future.
That's it for today. Thank you guys so much. That was great. Really appreciate it.
Please welcome back to the stage, Virgil Ochoa.